just seemed really to do that. And but now next week, speaking of being homeless, we're not going to have an adult forum. Instead, we're going to wish everybody to have a wonderful Thanksgiving and be prepared to come back on December 5th so that you can listen to the Care of Creation Committee or for Creation Committee. And they'll be talking about some potential things that they're dealing with, the building and those kinds of things, solar awnings and that kind of stuff. Really exciting things to help lessen our impact in terms of the environment, some of the different things they're doing. So come prepared to hear about that. And that'll be exciting. But in the meantime, we have this event and we have some very talented and dedicated people here. And I'm going to shut up and let them talk. So,
okay, thank
Greg,
you.
it's all yours.
And can you hear me okay? Otherwise, I can take my mask off. You're okay? Well, good morning. Thank you. And it's great to see all of you here and also our Zoom audience, Facebook Live audience. So welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to be here. This is a topic that's near and dear to Midvale, which I'll talk about. One that we've been involved with for years, and that's homelessness. And in going back and doing some research about this, I realized that I guess I knew this, but it reinforced that our commitment to homelessness is multifaceted. It's not just centered on one issue or one area or just families or, homeless women or homeless men. It's multifaceted. So I'm very pleased with our tradition, and I want to plug into that a little bit today. But before I do that, I'm going to take a moment to ask our guests to introduce themselves. I want to just thank them in advance and publicly because, it's a tough time. And, when I reached out, I just wasn't quite sure if we would all be able to do this, but I'm really glad that they're here. And I'll let them introduce themselves, and we'll start with Kristin, if you would.
Good morning.
Oh, there you go.
Good morning. Great. Good to be here again. I have been here a few times to speak primarily about the road home and our partnership with you all. Today will be a little bit more broad about homelessness in general. But just as a reminder, the road home, we work to end family homelessness. So like Greg said, that's just one piece of the bigger picture. But everything that we do is with families with children, and which is why I brought along my esteemed colleague, Jani, who works at the school district. And she is like the biggest advocate I know for children and students in the school district who are experiencing homelessness. So I'll let her say a few words about herself.
And before she does, Kristin, of course, is the executive director of the road home, just so you know. And you have the greatest mantra of all that I thought, every child deserves a home. So that's on their website, and they live and breathe that. So, okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jani.
Hi, I'm Jani. I work in the Madison School District as a transition education program teacher. So TEP, if any of you have volunteered and you heard TEP, that's us. And I've been doing that a long time. And I have to say the road home is one of my favorite collaborating partners.
So welcome again to our guests. For those of you that may not know me, I'm Greg Lampe, and I currently serve on the church council as the vice president, president-elect. I'm also past vice president and president-elect of the council. I served in that capacity. It was my honor to do so. And I'm also a long-term member of the social ministry committee. Been on that committee. I went back and looked. I think it was 1997 that I started on the social ministry committee. And that committee, formerly the Church Relations and Social Action Committee, really has taken the lead in many ways at Midvale in terms of serving, populations in the Madison area, not just homeless, but other kinds of hunger and so on. So really pleased with our tradition there. I became involved in homelessness in Madison through the road home, through the Interfaith Hospitality Network, which was the network of about 40 churches at one point, and buddy churches that, for us at least, it was 4 times a year, we would convert our church into a shelter. We would convert our classrooms, at first on the 2nd floor, and then later in the basement here, to living quarters for 3, 4, or sometimes even 5 families, depending on the size of the families. And that tradition started in 1999. We were one of the first churches on board. Gail Perlberg and I were the first co-coordinators of that program. Later, we had 5, 6 other coordinators, but at first we were the kind of the voice and the representatives of Midvale, with, of course, lots of leadership from the pastors and historically from all of you to help us make that happen. So 1997, it ended in 2018 when the road home shifted its focus from shelter to stabilizing homes, trying to create stable homes for those homeless families. And Kristin may talk about that a little bit, but that was a very pivotal moment. And it was a growing moment, I think, for all of us to follow that. We've also been involved with what was formerly known as the Second Chance Apartment Project. Our involvement with that began actually in 2004, when at the time I was serving as one of the trustees in the village of Shorewood Hills, and we needed a partner to sign a lease to allow a homeless family to have an apartment. And as a trustee, I didn't have the authority to do that, but the church, our church, stepped up and said, we'll sign a lease on your behalf. And that launched a succession of 5 different families over 2-year periods into a from homelessness to having a home apartment through the village of Shorewood Hills. We followed suit here as a church in 2013, where we made our Wakefield house, the church-owned Wakefield house, into a receiving home for a homeless family. And we've had 5 successive families since we started in 2013. So again, a rich history here. Now it's called the Bright Futures Program, and hopefully the families in our care, in our sponsorship, have a bright future ahead of them as they launch into their lives after they leave. And there's 90% success rate of those families who go through Second Chance to stay homeless at least over the first year, 2 years. So that's a pretty high success rate. And the idea is to break that cycle, right? That's the notion. Midvale participates in other ways too, to support particularly the road home. One is Tony Swamby and I have been hosting tables at the annual fundraising breakfast that usually takes place in October, November, sometimes it depends on the timing. We've even had that during the pandemic, a virtual fundraising breakfast. So that's another way that we work to really advocate for homeless families. We also support the Allied Drive eviction program, which is a prevention program, an Allied Drive, and social ministry. And with your support, we provide funding to support that effort so families are not evicted when they can't pay the rent. We also have, of course, historically worked with Porch Light and served meals at Grace Episcopal. Now that's been suspended, but we continue to send money to Porch Light to support their efforts. And again, they're working to break the cycle of homelessness and serve homeless families as well. And finally, we also support the YWCA 3rd Street program. That program is aimed toward mothers with children. And we provide, again, ongoing support through our budget, but also volunteers and bring all kinds of things that they need as they need them, supplies to that group. So again, a very broad scope, a lot of work with the road home, but not just the road home. And again, a great tradition of service. And it's thanks to all of you that we're able to do that. And I hope we can continue to do that into the future. So with that, I will turn it over to Kristin, and she'll talk a little bit about her work and what her group is doing.
Great, thank you. That was a very robust. I just thank you all for all you do. I've said before when I've been here that if I were allowed to have favorite congregations, you would be my favorite. And I don't say that just to say it. You really do a tremendous amount for the community. So thank you. All right, let's see if we had a little bit of tech issues, but let's see if we could get our PowerPoint up, both for people in person and watching from home. I saw it for a second. Perfect.
Yay.
So this is I think Jani and I both like to, we admit that we've been doing this work for a long time, but we're both I've never experienced homelessness. We're both white women. And so we do a try to at least bring in sort of the voices and the abilities of the families that we serve. So the two pictures here that you see were drawn by a 10-year-old and I believe a 7-year-old. We had children in our program, we asked them to just draw their dream home, and we got all sorts of just beautiful, beautiful art. So I wanted to kind of bring the children into this. And then Jani has a poem that she's gonna read that was written by a family.
So one of the things that I really love to do when I am working with families and youth and kids is to gather their voice. And this is a poem called Bear, and it was written by a young mom who had a couple children with her. Pile grows and grows, each memory, every hope being slowly dumped on and smothered. What now? Where? How? The questions won't stop crowding my brain. My children stand with quiet tears, not complaining or fighting. We watch, resigned to have the pile grow bigger and bigger. Homework, mementos of past art projects, books, favorite clothes, birthday, holiday gifts, toys, their life as it was, growing higher and higher. I grab their hands and we walk away. My youngest, looking over his shoulder, suddenly pulls away and runs to the pile. He points to the top of the growing pile. His comfort, his bear, is balanced on the top. I pull him away and he runs back, gesturing to the bear now covered with other items. Please, he begs, just my bear. I shake my head slowly. It is no longer ours. The work crew ignores his cries. They've been told not to engage. Do not make eye contact, just work. I pull my young son away, apologizing once more for a situation I had little control over. He cries now, body shaking sobs. I look back one more time at what was our life pile. The bear is sitting at the bottom of the pile and there's no one around. I send him back. I tell him to go, run, grab. I hold my breath. I watch his small feet run. I catch my breath as I see a face watching from the window. They quickly turn away, but not before I see understanding and tears. This one small hope, this one small gesture allows me to nod my head and grab my son's hand. We walk away one more time to the unknown. We walk away to fear and sadness, lost dreams, lost hope. We are together. This is but a moment in time, but what a hard moment it is, heartbreaking for our entire family. How do we repair the rip in our hearts, minds, and souls? At least we have the bear. This on the slideshow, which we'll leave for them to have, bear is a live link and you can have your own copy of it. Can you go to the next slide? We just wanted to start off with in the world of homelessness in our community, we kind of deal with two different interpretations of the definition of homelessness. There's the Housing and Urban Development definition, and there's the Department of Education definition of homelessness. And although they both have the same definition, lacking a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, when you go to actually implement what's under that law, there are different ways and priorities that happen. So in the world of HUD, they prioritize families in shelters and those who are unsheltered. So there's a pie chart we have here, and in the pie chart, it shows that in the year 1819, which is the last year, by the way, we had really solid data because the pandemic hit right after that. So it's a little old, but it's accurate. There were 16.9% of families that were in shelter and transitional housing, which is the short-term housing that you can stay in, but it's not permanent. And then unsheltered, so on the street, in your cars, living someplace not meant for human habitation. So if you add those two together, it's about 20%. And those are the families and the individuals that are prioritized under HUD for shelter and housing programs. So they have a priority list that once you get into those, then you can get into housing programs. The school district recognizes those two definitions and those who are self-paying in hotels and motels and those who are doubled up living with someone else due to economic hardship, loss of housing, domestic violence, any other reason that would be emergent, short-term, living with someone else because you have nowhere to go. It's not long-term housing where two families have planned to live together because it's easier. Might not be exactly adequate, but it's the plan to stay together and live there a long time. We're talking about folks who are living together with somebody else because they have no other options and often are putting at risk the family that's hosting them and themselves, because you're not supposed to stay with somebody else in our community more than 14 days under almost all leases. So if you look at this pie chart, 20% are supported under HUD with housing programs and shelter. 80% of the families that we work with in the schools do not have access to those housing programs because they don't meet the priority definition that HUD uses for housing. So we have a huge problem of challenges in our community, helping families find housing when they're not eligible for the housing programs that have subsidies, they have case management, they have all kinds of supports, which most of our other families also need. So it's a big challenge in our community that we've been talking about and trying to figure out what to do about it. And it's been going on for a long time. Anything else you want to say about that?
Yeah, so that first definition of HUD is where the road home ends up getting a lot of our funding from. So we tend to focus a lot more on that first population that Jani talked about. We recognize the importance of the 80% doubled up. So sometimes, like Jani and I think we have very similar views, and she's the advocate for the doubled up families, and I'm the advocate for the what it would be called literally experiencing homelessness families. But we know that it takes, it's the whole, these are families in our community, both experiencing, neither of those issues are good, right? We all know that we want families to be in their own safe, stable housing. On the next slide, you'll actually see a little bit of data on those two different definitions. So Jani mentioned this briefly when she mentioned the housing priority list. So as of, I think, a week ago, there are currently 144 families that meet that HUD definition of they're in shelters, streets, cars, places not meant for habitation, and 669 singles. So both single men and single women combined. And then that doubled up population, which Jani talked about, it's a lot harder to count because they're moving around. You don't really know where they are. They're living with maybe family one week and then a different family another week and friends. Then maybe they get a paycheck and they're in the hotel for a couple days. They're just very difficult to count. But we do know that, so in the previous slide, Jani had mentioned sort of the number of families in the 2018-2019 school year. Right now in the current school year there have already been 606 students identified as experiencing one of those types of homelessness from the start of the school year. And that is fresh data as of yesterday, or as of Friday. So those, just to kind of give you a snapshot of what is currently the situation in the community. And then I'll hand it back to Jani to talk about kind of what TEP does a little bit more.
And that 606 is probably over 250 families easily, because it's usually 2 to 3 kids in a household average. So the transition education program implements the McKinney-Vento law in schools. So the law was written for families and youth, but schools have to implement it. So our job is to find them, to verify them, to enroll them, and to provide them with an education that is strong and fulfilling for them. So we make sure that there's transportation in place, because in our world, once a child is identified as a student experiencing homelessness, they stay in that same school for the entire school year. It doesn't matter if they move around to 3 or 4 different residents, doesn't matter if they get into permanent housing, doesn't matter. We're going to keep them in the same school for 1 entire year, because what we know is that when kids change schools, they lose 4 to 6 months of academic progress. So whatever we can do to prevent that mobility between schools, we want to keep them in the same school no matter what for 1 whole year. So transportation is a huge part of our role. And it's a little challenge right now because we don't have drivers, and Hop Skip Drive is looking for drivers. So I'm just going to plug that right now. That's a program that works with us that needs drivers, and they pay well. We make sure they have all the resources and the needs they need to help meet their basic needs. So if they need backpacks, school supplies, hygiene items, feminine hygiene items, when they move, we also have blankets, or if they're in their car, we have blankets. We do snow pants, winter gear, which is the thing that we're gearing up for right now is winter. And we have emergency food bags in our office so that anybody that loses their housing and needs something to eat that night, they can come get a food bag from us. All kinds of things, whatever we need to do to meet and break down any barriers that these families may have in order for them to be really, truly ready to learn in school. So we do our best. So kids are allowed to enroll without any documentation. They don't have to have their birth certificate. They don't have to have immunizations. They don't have to have their credit history for high school. We get them enrolled, get them learning in school, and then support them. And then we get those documents. It's not like we enroll them and never get them. We want to make sure that they're in the right grade. We want to make sure they have the right credits. We want to make sure that they're immunized. So we get that after we get them enrolled and in their seats. We spend a lot of time with staff development and community advocacy. One of my roles a lot is to work with the Doubled Up Work Group. We'll talk about that in a little bit, just making sure that that voice is heard in our community and that folks understand that population. And then we coordinate with not only ourselves, but our outlying school districts, because we will transport children between our school districts to keep them in the same school for the whole year. So if we have a child that's in Mount Horeb schools who's in the shelter in Madison, because Madison is the only place where there are family shelters in our county, we will split the transportation with Mount Horeb to keep them in that Mount Horeb school. Of course, now we think about how old they are, how far that ride is, how consistent that ride is to make sure that's the best choice for them. But if we can keep them in the same school, we know that's good for them. I don't know what the next, and the next slide, please. So this is just a little bit about our program again, about we utilize point of contact. So in every one of our schools, we have somebody trained to be our eyes and ears in that school, and it's in every program. So there are two of us on a district-wide level, but then we are the backup, the technical support, the draw the line in the sand, helping all the families, the mobile unit for our school personnel as they work with families and identify them up front. Then we jump in behind them and do whatever needs to happen that they can't possibly manage or do. And then we just try to really stay connected with our community organizations and anybody else in the county to make sure that we are doing what we need to do to really help kids be in school. And the last thing I'll say is that attending school doesn't mean just going to school. It means being involved in sports. It means to be involved in clubs and after school programs. So oftentimes we will get them to school in the morning, but we send them home after their after school activities. First of all, we know it's a safer place for them most of the time to have something to do after school. But then we also know that it gives parents more time to work and do the things they need to do at home. And we know we have them another snack in them before they go home. And then we provide transportation after that afternoon. So they get one in and one out, but sometimes it's in before school starts and sometimes it's out way after school starts. And if you're in sports, we make sure you get to your events and help in whatever way, because we want them fully engaged in school, not just coming to school.
The one thing I'll add, Jani had mentioned that when children move schools, when they have that high school mobility, they often lose 4 to 6 months of academic progress. I would add that we've also have seen social declines, behavioral declines. It's not just in the academic sense, but every time you move, you have to meet new friends, meet the new teachers. So it's not just the academics. It's much more holistic than that. Which is again why we appreciate the partnership with the school district so much. So the next slide just talks a little bit, just one slide sort of specific about what the road home does. We try to work a little bit more upstream so that Jani and everybody doesn't see as many families currently experiencing homelessness. So we believe that housing is the answer to homelessness. And I think Jani would agree, right? We have a huge shortage of affordable housing in our community. And so what we try to do is we own some units that we make into affordable housing. We partner with landlords, with developers, with the Wakefield house that Greg mentioned. And then we also believe in our case management services. So you heard Jani mention earlier, that from that pie chart, all of those families could use housing and support services, but only about 20% are actually getting it. And so our case management is very holistic. Again, we the goal is to maintain housing, but we might work on a family with health, mental health, employment, education, whatever that family needs that will eventually help them sustain housing. That's what we work on. We have recently added an education specialist to our staff to specifically, again, just give more supports to students in schools to make sure We could do whatever we're doing to sort of try to stop that cycle of homelessness, thinking that if a child graduates and gets a good education, they're more likely to get a decent paying job, more likely to afford rent, less likely to become homeless as an adult when they're older. We have peer support specialists on staff now. So people who actually have lived experience of homelessness can just relate and support families that are in that situation now a little bit differently than somebody like me. We also have partnerships with therapists. So case management is not therapy. That's a little bit out of our scope, but we have formal partnerships with agencies that can provide therapy in home to families. We have early childhood partnerships with a really neat thing called the Playing Field. If you don't know about them, I would encourage you looking them up. And always looking for employers to connect with, et cetera. We're all about partnerships and holistically trying to support families. So really the road home now, like Greg mentioned, we used to have the shelter. Now we're really focusing on housing, creating more affordable housing opportunities, and then providing the support services. And now on the next slide, we're going to kind of take a step back and talk not just about the school or the road home, but just sort of how has COVID affected all of this, right? It's already not an easy issue to try to solve. And when you added a pandemic, it made things, I would say, 1,000 times harder. So just, again, very broadly, family shelter is primarily at the Salvation Army. Families pre-pandemic had to leave during the day and come back at night. Families and single women were both sheltered at the main building at 630 East Washington. The county really quickly was able to essentially rent out several different hotels in the community. So families were then 24/7 at the hotels, which then allowed more space to distance for the single women that stayed then at Salvation Army. The single men's shelter, which I didn't know you guys were a part of, so thank you for that. Greg mentioned the suspension of the meals. That's because they're not in the basement of Grace Episcopal anymore. They've been moved around quite a bit. Initially out to Warner Park Community Center, and then when things started to open up and they wanted that back, now they're at the Fleet Service building over like on First and like Fordham area, like East Washington First. They're about to move again out by Easttown to a temporary location, but with hopes of finding another permanent location in the next year or so, because no shelter is really meant to be in a basement of a church, right? So this will actually be what's called a purpose-built shelter for the single men. So all of this, like, I think our community knew that we needed different shelter systems, both for families, single women and single men for a while, but the pandemic, I think, just magnified that, and finally there's some more political will to get those things up and going. And again, in my opinion, I think it just really showed the importance of housing, right? How do you social distance if you don't have your own place? If you think back to March 2020, when everybody was very scared, we didn't know a lot about what COVID was, everybody just needed to stay away from each other. You can't do that if you don't have a home. You can't do virtual learning if you're a student, if you don't have a home to do that from. You can't work from home as an adult if you're even lucky enough to have a job that allows that. So again, just the importance of getting people in their own homes where they could have that, the safety and the stability, I think was really important. And I guess one sort of silver lining is that there has been quite a bit of federal dollars coming into our community from the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan Act that are helping to fund some new housing initiatives. So silver lining is, again, I think we're getting some of that political will now to do what we know we've needed for decades in this community. So that's just a kind of an overview of COVID. The next one is sort of intertwines. It's, again, just, I can't stress enough the need for more affordable housing. Both our city and county have done studies and research. You can go to the next slide. That say that we need to build 1,000 more units of affordable housing for 30 years, 1,000 units a year for 30 years, just to try to get where we should be. So it's just definitely still a huge need. And I know I'm thankful to the city and county for having some affordable housing funds being invested into the community. As long as every partnership, one family, one child at a time, if we can get them into affordable housing, that makes all the difference for them. And Jani will also talk about some challenges that have been magnified by the pandemic in the school system.
I had a thought I was going to share and I lost it. It'll come back. So this is the next slide. And it just, the truth is that the pandemic kind of shifted everything that we do. But what it did do was make some specific things that we're able to navigate harder. So just connections to resources and being able to walk in someplace and get some help stopped. So everything went virtual and everything went by phone. So many of our families that had phones were more challenged with not just having the phone to hold their whole life and all their pictures and everything that they had, but they also had to have more minutes, more time, more data on it so that they could now negotiate the world virtually. So the challenge on our families just being able to access and maintain those connections to those resources was a real challenge. What we realize in the world of homelessness is that relationships are key to making things happen. And when all of a sudden your relationship moves from an in-person to a virtual world, it shifts that ability, that relationship. There's just a piece of that is different. I'm not saying that it's bad, and actually the virtual world made some connections even easier. And there's meetings I can go to now that I've never went to before because everybody's virtual. But that person to person, in-person connection when you are in crisis can feel just a little bit more warmer and just a little bit more solid when you know that somebody really gets it and you can see that physical, that nonverbal connection that you don't always see through a virtual platform. So that was a real challenge. And I think one of the other things is I lost sight during the pandemic, and even just bring it back now, are families who don't have school-aged children. That's a whole population that's missing from our data. Our families who don't have school-aged children because the schools don't count them. Our community doesn't count them. They're not in the PIT count, the point in time count that the HUD, that our community does at least once a year, sometimes twice. Those families and those really young kids are missing. And I lost complete sight of them. And that's part of my role, is to really work with those non-school aged families. And they went underground, and we lost so many of our children during the pandemic who went virtual and didn't have a way to charge their Chromebook. They had the Chromebook, they had the hotspot, they had everything, but they didn't have a way to charge it.
Mhm.
So that was a whole challenge. So our library stepped up, and our libraries became a real partner with us to help us through that piece. Home visits couldn't happen with our young with our young non-school age kids, but also with our school age kids. We would do home visits, check on attendance. We would check on issues that might be going on. We might be bringing basic needs and food and supplies, and home visits were stopped. So, it was, homelessness on its own is expensive. It's an expensive thing to be homeless. You have to pay for everything out of pocket, and you don't have things that you had before. So even though we had more access to food, you had to be able to get there. You had to have transportation to get to the food. Even though we had more community agencies opening up for basic needs, you had to have a way to access that or have somebody that could bring it to you. And then when your own family got COVID, then there's that quarantine. So you couldn't even be nearby. It just became more complicated during all that time. And on the next slide, Kristin's going to talk a little bit about community.
Yeah, I feel like we've been fairly negative talking about all the challenges and problems. So maybe we'll sort of shift now into some opportunities and ways to get involved. But essentially, we know that our biggest impact happens when our whole community can come together, right? So just a few things. So again, Greg mentioned not even just the Road Home and Porch Light, but YWCA. We're all part of what's called that Homeless Services Consortium. So that's that top left corner there. The faith community and organizations, anything from Girl Scouts to, we have high school basketball teams that will call us and say, what can we do? Donors and volunteers, the affordable housing funds that I mentioned from the city and county, businesses, developers. I mean, it really takes a community effort. That was our tagline initially before Every Child Deserves a Home, is that this is a community response to homelessness. And I can't I can't believe in that any stronger than I do. It really is going to take all of us to do whatever we can to solve this issue. So on the next page, there are a couple opportunities. Jani had mentioned the doubled up work group that she's a part of. Again, the biggest advocate for this population. So maybe I'll turn it back to you and you could take this slide and then I'll take the next.
Is there any chance that the Zoom people can see the slides?
Oh, yeah, we'll make sure you get access to those.
Thank you.
Oh. That's okay. I can talk about that slide even if you don't see it. So the Doubled Up Work Group is actually a work group of the Homeless Services Consortium. So that COC, that larger group. And this is a work group that specifically is focused on doubled up populations.
If I may, folks who have been Zooming, have you been able to see the slides? No.
No, not till right now. Or no,
Okay.
no, we haven't.
No, we
Thank you
can't
so
see
much
them
for
at
your
all.
feedback. Again, this is one of those odd things that we're trying to coordinate, and frankly, I'm a lousy juggler.
No
but
worries.
we will also make these slides available to people. If you give me an email or contact this secretary, we'll make sure that that PowerPoint is available to you. In the meantime, I'm going to go back to our speaker and thank you for letting us know.
Yes, I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate you telling us. So the Doubled Up Work Group is focused, right now, most of the folks on the team are focused on doubled up families, but it's doubled up population. So it includes our singles and our youth, who are big doubled up folks that couch surf from place to place all the time. So our youth are big doubled up components. And we just recently advocated for the county to hire a position to really focus on doubled up populations in our community, looking for advocacy and resources and networking and collaboration. And hopefully that position will be in place, I hope by next year. They're in the interview process. We also have the Double Up Work Group is sponsoring with the Madison Public Library an event on January 20th from 6 to 7. We're launching a film that was done by Diane Nealon about doubled up and self-paying in hotels populations in Dane County. And we're going to launch that video in January, and she's going to show it and speak about it. And then we're going to have a community conversation about homelessness at the end. So it's only an hour. So again, it's going to be one of those quick things. But after that, there's a year-long planned activities by the Doubled Up Work Group for being involved with homelessness throughout the year. So we'd love to have somebody from your community be a representative on that committee if you would love to join us on that. We meet on Tuesday nights. There's more information on the slides. And then there's the Youth Action Board is looking for young adults. So if you know anybody that's a young adult of 14 to 24 that might be interested in the world of youth homelessness, our community just received a large grant to really look at youth housing for homeless youth who are experiencing homelessness housing. And it'll be implemented over the next 3-4 years. And the Youth Action Board is looking for youth to be active on that with youth voice so that they can have some commitment. They really would like youth that have lived experience, but they also will take youth who are just interested in the issue of youth homelessness. So if you have somebody that's interested in that, you can get in contact. And then once our schools open up to volunteers, please jump back in and be a volunteer in our schools. I can't say enough about volunteering either for the road home or in person or wherever you are, but those volunteers make our schools rotate in a much easier and better way. So hop in and be a reading tutor or a mentor to somebody in the schools. We really appreciate that.
And then the next slide, if you could see it, is just some other ways to get involved, right? So you heard Jani talk about just being able to give those basic needs, personal hygiene items, school supplies. So both of our agencies collect donations like that, either monetary donations or we could purchase and distribute, or you could just bring some of those supplies directly to us. Other ways are again, I know I'm pushing this affordable housing thing, but contact elected officials just to anytime there's anything around affordable housing, if you're willing to sort of advocate for that. Build awareness like you are today. So Jani and I would say are both tireless workers where if we're ever invited to speak about homelessness and family homelessness and the effects of homelessness on children and students, we very rarely say no. So more people still need to know, I think, that this is happening in our community and how they could get plugged in. And then this is a big one. Jani is always great at reminding me about this is if you are, primarily, I feel like this happens downtown or on State Street around the Capitol, but if you do see somebody experiencing homelessness, a lot of people will just sort of help them be invisible again. And so even if you're not giving money, just look them in the eye, acknowledge them, tell them to have a good day. That actually goes way farther than you would think. So just to acknowledge people and notice them and help them feel like they are a human being who is temporarily experiencing homelessness is really helpful. And the next couple slides are just our contact information. If you have any follow-up questions, our phone numbers and emails are on that. We also included some additional links. So the TEP website will be on the slides when you get them, the road home. That the third one that says DaneCountyHomeless.org, that's the whole homeless services consortium. So comprised of 50 to 60 agencies or partners that have a little bit of, some piece of trying to end homelessness. There's a DPI website, which is the Department of Public Instruction. And then also it's called NACI, which is the National Association for Education of Homeless Children and Youth. So it's a mouthful, but lots of resources where you could kind of see that intersection of schools and homelessness. And I think then we'll just open it up for questions for the remaining of the time, unless Greg wants to.
No, that's okay. I just want to thank you for that wonderful presentation, and I apologize also to the people on virtually joining virtually. We will make sure you get the slides. And I guess I just want to reinforce that even though we are, it seems like a small piece, we're an important piece because many pieces, of course, equals a lot of work. And the collaborations that we've been hearing from both Jani and Kristin. I was looking at all these old records and I got Rachel Connect. Well, anyway, it doesn't matter. But Kristin and Jani, I just want to say that, that collaboration is really the key here. And I'm so pleased to hear about the comprehensive nature of that collaboration. It's really grown even since a year ago. And even though the pandemic's been disruptive and brought to bear like lots of issues in our culture, it may have been disruptive, but it seems like there's also been some good things that have come out of that, particularly on the federal level in terms of federal support. So we'll just hope that keeps going, right? But let's open it up for questions. We have about 15 minutes and want to make sure you have a chance to share your views or encourage you to ask questions at this point.
Two things. In the school population, is it pretty well spread over preschool to high school, or does it concentrate in younger or older? And then to Greg, I was very impressed with your opening remarks. And I hate to do this, but why don't you consider putting little write-ups in the community so we're better informed?
Sure, that's a great idea. I can do that.
Sorry about that, because that's
right.
a lot of work. I know.
No, you can volunteer me for work. I don't mind. Thank you. It's good work, right? It's good work.
As far as numbers and data, the younger that you are, the more there are. So there are actually, like the last data I saw around shelter populations, 10% of the shelter population are babies. So there are more infants and toddlers, which is why that data that's missing from those younger families that don't have school-age kids is so important, because we're just missing that data. And then we do have more elementary students than we do middle and high. But I have to tell you, the growing population we have right now are unaccompanied youth. Youth are on their own without a parent or guardian. And that is a really growing population right now.
I'll just add as far as the numbers that we see. So last year we served almost 500 children in our housing programs. and 40% of those were age 5 or younger. So just to reiterate what Jani's saying, a lot of little ones who are in their formative years of learning and growing and developing, they need that stability. So yeah, I would echo Jani's.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you, Greg and Gail, and all of you have been helping. I have a long history. I'm one of the founders of NAMI, and I don't know to what extent you all are, interacting in that arena also. But I was on the Porch Light Board in the earlier 2000s. And at that time, we were saying we needed 5,000 units of affordable housing. So this situation or problem has grown exponentially. And it's bigger than we think because of the doubling up, because of not really being aware of the number of youth who are, Briar Patch has worked with that to some extent. So it's a huge, huge issue in this country, and this lack of data collection. I mean, just taking, say, one cut of a pie and not saying, oh, we've got a bigger picture. We've got a bigger kind of situation. So the fact that you're focusing on the doubling up as well as the other, I mean, we have to look at the whole. And then we have to really help people understand that the issue is enormous in this country, just enormous. Thank you so much.
Thanks for saying that. I think I had on the actual slide, but I don't remember saying it out loud. But yeah, this is not just a challenge in Madison or Dane County. It's a national crisis, in my opinion. So thank you for all of that.
If I heard you right, you said that only shelters are in Madison. So if a family in, let's say, Oregon becomes homeless, they have to come into Madison. There are no community resources elsewhere.
I wouldn't say there's no community resources, there's no shelters. So, and then transportation from Oregon to Madison is, once you get into town, you get stuck here because you don't have a way to get back out.
There is one new one. It is just a hotel, like how even Salvation Army kind of went to hotels, and is it Wanakee or Sun Prairie? So So there is one, if you can hear that, one hotel in Wanakee, one hotel in McFarland that are sort of acting as shelters right now. But the rest are all in Madison.
Yeah, that leads to my question as far as housing, new housing being built. I used to go on the east side a lot more when my daughter was in town and transporting my granddaughter to school. But and I think I was right that there was some sort of a shelter on the corner of First and I don't know if it was Washington. No, anyway, close to that. And I was just over there recently and was so surprised. Like the dollar store, all that is torn down, and they're building something on that corner of Washington and First. Does that have anything to do with? Also, the next question is, on the news I saw recently, they're building some tiny homes somewhere, and I don't know if you can tell us about
Yep,
that.
I think we could probably talk a little bit about both of these. So yeah, earlier when I mentioned kind of when the pandemic first happened, we had to figure out what to do with shelters. So the single men's shelter originally went out to Warner Park, and then when they had to get kicked out of there, they're at that building, I think that you're talking about, around First and East Washington. That whole area is going to become the Madison Public Market, which is why now they're going to get displaced again and get moved out to closer to East Town Mall until there's actually a permanent site. So what you said is exactly what I was trying to say earlier, with sort of the single men's shelter getting moved around during all of this. And then this, do you want to talk about encampments? I mean, I don't know a ton, but so Rindall Park has been in the news quite a bit. This is where a lot of unsheltered, primarily singles. I've never heard of any family being there. Maybe one or two families have, they're living in tents at Rindall Park in the east side. And there has been obviously challenges there. It's also an eyesore. I'll even say that, right? For people coming into the community down East Wash, if that's the first thing you see. It's just wasn't really set up. It's not set up for people to live there, but people are doing that because they're that desperate. So again, with some federal funds, the city is now sort of setting up showers, bathrooms, some tiny homes, with the idea that folks who are living at the sort of just, what would you call it, just impromptu encampment will now go to something that's a little bit more set up for success. So the first people just moved to that official encampment this past week. So that's sort of the goal, is that we get just a little bit more stability and more safety. There'll also be support services at the official encampment that the city is putting out. Whereas at Rheindal, I think there were some outreach workers going out there a little bit, but it wasn't like a formal program. So there weren't really those, like the case managers and the support, but that will be provided now on the east side, where they're sort of shifting that encampment.
Kristin and Jani, are there any success stories? And if so, how do people manage to climb their way out of homelessness?
Just my last comment on the tiny houses. Those are specifically housing singles. They're not large enough for, and it doesn't house couples. So couples have to each be in their own single, but they can be next door to each other. So Jocelyn's question was, how about success stories and anybody kind of climbing up out of homelessness into housing? I would have to say that the success that the families that I've worked with are the ones who have been able to get into shelter and get connected to that housing priority list. They work really hard, tirelessly, the case managers, in helping them look at their needs, breaking down barriers and getting into housing. I had a family the other day that had 3 children, and one of the children was a preschooler. So not only did they really spend time with them, looking at their housing needs, trying to help them find housing first, where the older kids are going to school. I was so happy to hear that, because housing is so hard to find that sometimes you have to go to where housing is versus housing where the kids are attending school is a real challenge. But they found an apartment in the neighborhood where they were attending school. So they're now on a school bus versus our transportation, which often got them to school an hour late. So it was nice to have them get to school on time. And they found childcare for the younger child, so that now mom is working and all her kids are being taken care of in safe places with food and meals during the day. So that was a really nice.
I appreciate the question, and it reminds me that I also need to do a better job of talking about success stories. So Greg and I both have homework, it sounds like. But you know, the issue could seem so insurmountable sometimes, that you also have to remember the smaller successes. So just a parent getting a job, or a promoted at a job, or a child graduating 5th grade or 8th grade or high school. We intentionally celebrate all of those at the Road Home. And then obviously the bigger things, right? Getting your own apartment, maintaining that apartment for 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, 4 years. We have people that we have probably, I should know this, up to 5 or 6 people that have been homeless that are now on our staff at the Road Home. We have people on boards at agencies, including the Road Home. We always have at least 2 people on our board of directors that are prior program participants. So I mean the successes are just huge, right? From the sort of the smaller steps to giving back to the community. And so I admit that I probably need to do a better job of that. We also just had a family actually become a homeowner, had been homeless. I mean, and to think about that from the extreme continuum of homelessness to becoming a homeowner, and what that all takes, the hard work and determination. Those don't happen often, but they happen. So like, yes, there are tons of success stories. You could see a lot of these on our website, or if you follow us on social media as well.
Go ahead.
When you drive around Madison, there are apartment complexes coming up everywhere. Can you estimate, or is there any way to say there's a number here that we will have access to?
So that's been, if I'm understanding the question correctly, it's been one of our strategies when I talked about partnering with developers. So you're exactly right. There's lots of big apartment complexes going up. We have 4 now. So the closest one here would probably be Taylor Place off of Schrader Road. I don't even know how to say it. It's a Stonehouse development property. we have 10 units there for families that we serve with on-site case management. On the east side, there's Fair Oaks Apartments that went up on Fair Oaks. We have 8 units for families coming right out of homelessness there with on-site case management. The Breeze, which is behind the Lyric, right by the Festival Foods on East Wash. Great location, that went up in 2018. We have 9 units in there. So this idea of like trying not to put families coming out of homelessness into like another pocket of poverty, but actually integrate them into some of these larger, nicer, newer buildings. That is one of our strategies. So is it enough? Not yet, but the fact that we're getting 8, 9, 10 units in some of these, I think is great. We actually have families moving in this month. It's again on the east side. It's called the Ace Apartments on Cottage Grove Road. That's with our first partnership with Moving Out, which is actually another nonprofit housing developer. So yeah, we're definitely trying that. So if anybody has any other connections or ideas to landlords or developers as these continue to go up around town, please let us know.
I don't want to be a downer in the middle of this wonderful conversation, but the challenge also is that many of the families that we're able to get into these housing projects come off the housing priority list, which means that my doubled up families don't have access to those. So I am not saying stop doing that. I'm saying we need other avenues to get families into affordable housing in addition to.
One quick comment question. I was under the impression, and this was long ago, that many of the homeless people are employed. Is that still true? Am I right?
We saw a disproportionate number of people lose their housing in the pandemic. I mean, sorry, employment. I said housing, so I'm so used to that. So pre-pandemic, yes, I would say that that's a common, like a myth buster, is a lot of people didn't think that families who were homeless were working. Often working though, entry level jobs. I don't really even like that word, but making, $7, $8, $9 an hour, you just cannot afford a 2-bedroom apartment on that wage. A lot of families, like I said, that lost that employment, either because it was sort of the hospital, a lot of people cleaning rooms at hotels, and hotels sort of shut down when there was nobody traveling. Food places kind of shut down, so we had just a lot of families just simply lost their job, and or in a way had, when their children couldn't go to school or daycares because those closed and the children had to be home. If they were a single parent, then they literally just had to quit their job because they had to be home with right. So like, however way you look at it, we saw a lot of employment loss last year. That's starting to pick up now. But that was a huge challenge in 2020, was employment.
Me? Oh, okay, good. We're running out of time. We're almost at 10:15. Again, I just want to say thank you to all of you who were with us today, this morning, as well as online. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you've learned a bit about what's happening around homelessness, not only in the community at large, but in the schools as well. Some of the challenges and opportunities. I'm kind of mixed about what's happening. I'm pleased with the progress, but as I know Kristin and I know that Jani share this, it's just not enough. We just need to keep plugging at this, because the problems get as someone noted, actually have gotten worse over time. And yet we continue to make progress with apartments and with different programs. And I know the churches are getting involved also beyond Midvale. There's a lot of involvement and engagement in the faith communities, trying to really manage this problem as best we can and contribute to trying to end homelessness, which is a big, tall order, but we shouldn't be discouraged. I guess that's the point, right? So anyway, thank you all for being here and your support, and we'll see you soon. And now, thank you so much for having us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And a reminder,
Thanks.
oh, go ahead. Absolutely. Reminder, no forum next week. In 2 weeks, we'll be having the Care for Creation doing a presentation. And one of the exciting things about that is that as they bring forward ideas on modifying the building, that gives us the ability to use our resources in other ways. And so thank you for pointing these out to us.